Hello, my name is Michael Reese. Over the next couple weeks, I'm going to be hosting a number of interviews with some knowledgeable individuals that have a variety of experiences in music and in education, in the hopes of learning a lot, but also covering some important 21st century topics for educators and for music programs. So there are a lot of students going through school music programs right now that are thinking seriously about going into a music career, but for many of them, the only options that are presented are music education or performance. They can be music teachers, or they can try to scrap together a living being a full-time performer. However, there are a much wider range of careers available in music, including retail and music production, composition and arranging, and as Ellie is going to talk to us about today, music therapy. So, Ellie Mehr, tell us about yourself.
All right. Well, hello. Like Michael said, I'm a music therapist. I am based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And in addition to music therapy, I also work as a percussion educator. But music therapy is kind of my main jam, my main source of income, my main living, all that type of stuff.
When did you start music?
Oh gosh, I started music way back, like back in first or second grade. I started taking piano lessons, like just the stock, like getting introduced to music through piano. I joined band in elementary school, and all through my beginner band and school experience was a percussionist. So that's kind of my concert background or my like musical training. And then when I went into college, I had more experience like doing marching percussion. So indoor drum line and march DCI. I guess that's kind of, yeah, march DCI. And then as I was doing that, I was also like developing other skills as a musician to do that I could use in my music therapy career. So lots of guitar, ukulele, some voice stuff. But I'm a percussionist and an instrumentalist by trade.
Great. So kind of moving into the heart of what I want to talk to you about today. So I can think back to when I was in high school or going through college, and I definitely heard the words music therapy, but I don't think I ever had it presented to me in like a serious, thorough way. Like I don't think I really like knew what it was until I talked to you about it, and that was after I had been out of college and teaching for multiple years, before I
Mhm.
actually had like a clear idea of what it actually looks like. So when did you first learn about music therapy as an option, and what made you want to go into that?
Yeah, I think that's really common actually. Like not a lot of people know what it is. Like even now, like people within the field of just music or percussion, like I tell them what I am and everyone's reaction is like, oh, that's really cool. But it's really easy to tell like most people really have no idea like what that actually entails. Um, which is not anyone's fault, right? I think, but I think that's still like a pretty common perception just of the field in general. So I learned about music therapy because I actually had the opportunity to take a class in high school that was all about like, like career focused, like finding your career. It was kind of an elective course that I was able to take. And so it was like the first semester of the class was, you kind of just like research careers and did different projects and different presentations with your peers about like different career fields you were interested in and what that looked like realistically. The whole point of the course was to try to show people what the jobs they were interested in doing or the majors they were doing was like what that actually looked like. Right. So if they went to college, they weren't blindsided by like, oh, I didn't know this is what it was like to actually be an engineer or whatever. And then if you did that class for a semester, you had the option to do the second semester where you could get paired with a mentor, like in the community of someone who did that job. So when I did the first semester elective of that class, that's how I stumbled upon music therapy. Like we had an assignment one day and I was literally looking up like college majors. And kind of like you described, Michael, I was not like, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, right? Like I didn't want to be, like you were saying earlier, I didn't really want to be a band director. I didn't really want to do music education, but I was interested in using music. I was maybe interested in like working with people, like specifically the disability community. And I just no one around me like really had any guidance for what that could look like for a job. So I always thought that I would probably have to like go into teaching or like psychology or like some sort of support like that. And then I would do like music on the side, like you were describing, like do it as a side hobby, like hopefully you can get enough income to make ends meet type of thing. So when I was doing this class, I was researching majors and I saw a major that said music therapy. And so my high school brain was like, oh, music therapy, like those are things that I think I'm kind of interested in. And I started looking into it and it really just opened this whole world of opportunity to me that I had no idea existed. And I think, kind of bringing it full circle, the people around me didn't know it existed either. Like I started telling people about music therapy, and some of my closest music mentors were like, what is that? Like, there's no way that's legit. Like, there was really like no resource for me. Like, even when I found out about the field, like, knew about it. So that's how
Right.
I found out about, yeah.
Well, like some questions and some things I want to highlight.
Yes.
So, question one. So this class was mandatory for everybody in school, like this career exploration class.
No, it was like an elective. So you could take, it was like a choice. Like if you took like a language or if you took this class, it was an elective. And the school I did go to though had electives that were like prioritized in careers. So you could also like there were people that would go into like the middle schools and do like the drug education, right? That was a course. And so it was a lot of the people that were interested in like the medical field or the teaching fields. And then there was also the people that just left school and like went to work. So like my school did have an emphasis on like helping people like be set up for success, like whatever that looked like after high school. But it wasn't required,
Right.
you know.
So it was sort of just lucky that you stumbled across this career. It wasn't like ever formally presented to you. Um, and the people around you didn't know much about it, which I think is kind of shocking because the University of Minnesota is one of the best music therapy schools.
Right. Which was a coincidence. I didn't know that. Like that was a total coincidence. I didn't know that until after I got into the program, which is interesting because, I think there's people that are trying to get into these fields, right? Or, like not just music therapy, any fields, and they're competitive and they know a lot. And that was just very different. So yeah, I took the class and then like for that semester. And so I did a lot of research on music therapy. And when I look back on it now, a lot of the research that I did about the field and the presentations I was doing don't feel super accurate. And I think that's a reflection of people don't know about this field and there's not very much information out there. So I was doing research on like music therapists in hospitals and, how they're helping like people after brain injuries, like recover their speech or things that are true in music therapy, but it's not like necessarily like the day-to-day reality. So it's kind of funny to look back at that research of what I thought music therapy was. It's still pretty different than what I actually do every day.
Right. I think I'm just a little shocked that, if there was a place that was going to have some knowledge of music therapy, it seems like Minneapolis would be a good candidate. A lot of the band directors probably went to the University of Minneapolis.
Mm-hmm.
That program is very prominent. It's like nationally known. It's 20 minutes away from where you go to school, and they still don't know about the profession. It's still not like presented as an option.
Yeah, I mean, people really didn't know about it. I remember even doing the class, like sharing some of the stuff, like with I was really close with my band directors, right? Like spent a lot of time in the band room. Um, I was doing like on my extracurriculars through the music program. And I remember like telling them about it and they weren't really like excited. Like they were just like, oh, cool. Like, cause they really just like were so unaware of what I was even talking about. Like it was hard for them to even really be connected. And that's kind of how I felt from like my parents too, right? Like my parents were like, is this it? Like, are you gonna be able to like make money? Like kind of the classic stereotype of music and education. But to your point though, I think that did help me to an extent because I did do the second semester of the course. And so I was able to get paired up with a music therapist in the community. And I remember my teacher, Mrs. Love, who did that class, like was like, I don't know how I'm going to find a music therapist because she kind of had her contacts. Like 3M is in Minneapolis, right? So people interested in engineering were just like going to 3M. And like she had been doing the course long enough that she had a pretty solid database of people. And she was like, I don't know how I'm going to find a person. And so there are a lot of music therapists in the community. So once we started researching them, it was like, oh, there's music therapists at most of the hospitals here. There are music therapists that work at the U. There were actually music therapists in my school district. With my school district was one of the only districts at the time that had music therapists like as faculty, and they were the like flip of adapted phy ed. So kids would get like 30 minutes of adapted phy ed, 30 minutes of adapted music, which is a really good model, which we can get into later. But so they ended up being in my own school district. And so I was able to leave school and like those were the people that I was able to go shadow. So that was also cool because I was staying in my community and I was like going to the schools that I grew up around. And that's really how I got introduced to it. Like, so I was going there 3 days a week observing. Her name was Danielle Zick. And I like credit her for being a music therapist. Like she let me come and observe her like a couple days a week. And then kind of let me, like, I remember I was like interacting with the students, like kind of doing some of the music sessions, really. Like, I mean, in a very guided way, but as a high schooler, like that is so invaluable. And I knew her like while I was auditioning for the program, I had to interview. So they were able to help me because they went to the U. So they were able to kind of help me get an idea of what that part of the process looked like. And they were also really realistic with me about what music therapy would look like. So like how much we make and things like that, that like are still, I think, issues in the profession that people like just that idea of transparency. So I was really able to get like a true of it within the Minneapolis community, which I think does go back to like the program being here. And yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think the thing I've learned is it's way more common and widespread than you maybe would think it is. But you never hear about it. It kind of just like exists under the radar, and then all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden there's one in every town, and you just never knew. Um, so to clear up some of that lack of awareness, what is music therapy?
Yes, great question. So music therapy, just kind of like the one sentence, like music is the use of music to achieve non-musical goals.
All
Um,
right. So
yeah,
okay. So what do you actually do in a session? What does a music therapy session look like?
yeah. So I use music to achieve non-musical goals that are in a variety of different skills. So I work with my clients to, um, like again, through music, right? But we're working on cognitive skills, gross and fine motor skills, speech, like expressive and receptive language, sensory skills, social skills, musicality skills. So we're using music to address all of these skills that are coming up in other areas of their lives. My clients specifically are, um, the majority of my caseload is individuals with disabilities. So the disclaimer is like music therapy can look different, like based on who you work with, based on where you work. But like for my specific experience, like I am working with a lot of individuals with disabilities. And so we're working on a lot of skills that can be transferred outside of the music environment that really they're working on realistically in other places, right? Like on their IEP at school, like their other therapies, like at their doctor's appointments. And I'm using music like as that vehicle. Yeah. So lots of like music games, music activities, playing instruments, dancing and singing songs to work on those different goals.
Gotcha. I think so. I think the and not that it's 0% this, but I think the biggest like misconception I had is like when I heard music therapy, I related it far more to like a therapist. Whereas I think maybe the better comparison for something like that is probably like an occupational therapist or like someone that does like physical therapy where it's like it's the motion, it's the doing the activities, it's like that kind of activity as opposed to, something else, like something closer to like a therapist.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think that's a pretty common misconception. I think it's funny that you said that because I actually like use that comparison a lot. It's like it is, I think, very similar to OT or physical therapy in the sense that like if you break your arm, right, like you go to physical therapy to like specifically retrain. Like it's a very specific objective, right? So as a music therapist, we are working on like a specific skill through the use of music. And instead of, occupational therapy, you might be, practicing for weeks to like be able to pick up that or that fork and like bring it to your mouth, right? Like we're using music in a very specific way. Yeah, so I think that's actually a really good example, a really good comparison. Mm-hmm.
Well, and maybe that's instructive for this next question, but who is music therapy for? Who are the people that you're seeing every day?
Yeah, that's a great question too. It depends, right? That's kind of like the joke. Like I have a lot of students to me now from the University of Minnesota, and a lot of my like answers to their questions are like, it depends, right? But music can be for everyone, right? Like we know that music is for everyone, right? Like everyone likes music, everyone listens to music. And the common thing when I tell people I'm a music therapist is people will say, music is my therapy too, which is like, okay, whatever, but it is this idea though, right? Like that's silly, but there is this idea that like music is for everyone, right? It's accessible, like people can listen to it, people have different tastes, they use it to express their emotions, like regulate their mood, socialize with other people, right? Like we're just doing that in our daily life. So it's really for anyone. Most music therapists work in schools, hospitals, healthcare settings, like end of life care, like hospice and palliative care. Some work in rehab facilities, like either physical rehab after like, like brain injury or after like a significant injury. And some work in like the shorter rehab units, like mental health related, like drug and alcohol use, like 72-hour psych type of situations. I work in a private practice setting. So I do a lot of, I have an office that people come to, and I also homes. I go to a few schools, and like I said, it's really for everyone, but it's people that need the development of certain skills, right? So individuals with disabilities, adolescents or individuals on the spectrum, Down syndrome, various disabilities, right? I go to some adult group homes. I also work with neurotypical preschoolers. So it really just depends. There's a wide variety of people that it can be for.
So in your situation specifically, when you're working with people with disabilities, specifically on the spectrum, or you're working with super young students, what are some of those skills that you're trying to foster?
Yeah, a lot of the skills I specifically am working on with my caseload is, again, kind of these like everyday skills that they're working on in other areas. So I find myself doing a lot of cognitive skills. So like following one step directions, sustaining your attention span, being able to attend to a task, academic skills, if it's a young kiddo, that's appropriate for what they're doing in school. A lot of social skills like turn taking, waiting, sustaining attention, participating in like the structure of a rule based game. I a lot of emotion, right? Emotional regulation, sensory regulation, emotional support. And then I have a motor stuff as well. So like fine motor skills, like kind of just like improving like use of singular fingers, or like palmar grasp, which is like holding on to something like this, like pincher grasp is the pinch. And we're able to kind of address all of those skills through music, right? If we're gonna like shaking an instrument or playing a drum, like holding on to like a music note visual that I have, or um, a lot of overall regulation. And the thing that's great about music is there's a lot of like, we have the goals of the client's treatment plan, but there is just constantly other things rest as secondary gains, right? So we might be, working on like stop and go, so that if a client likes to, I don't know, run away a lot, right? Like some kiddos get, big emotions, they need to leave the room, right? Big sensory feelings. And so this idea of like being able to stop on command, so like to keep them safe, right? Like stop. I don't know if this is a great example to represent the whole field, but here I go. Right, the idea of working on like a stop and go music game, which is so fun and motivating, right? Like just the natural tension of the music stopping. Like every kid ever just gets like this huge belly laugh, and then you go when the music starts. So hopefully they'll be able to eventually transfer that skill to a life moment outside of music, right? Like being able to stop or go on cue, right? And then, just kind of building up those skills. And then there's also this like underlying thing of they're interacting with someone, they're getting social experience, they are regulating their bodies, right? Like learning stuff about emotional regulation, sensory regulation. They're kind of learning basic musical skills, right? Like basic tempo, stop and go. Eventually you can transfer that to fast and slow, right? Like you can kind of, and then you can just build it up. And so I always have a secondary goal of, music skills, but it's always with the idea of how it can be transferred to their life outside of the music environment.
Right. I think that's really fascinating because I think, again, like not knowing much about it, like coming up through everything, um, I think it's easy to think of music therapy as being like closer to a music teacher, like you're teaching music, or maybe you're teaching music to kids that have challenges. And that's true, but that is secondary to these other goals you're trying to achieve. And music's really the vehicle. So I think a lot of times, like when you talk about how you work with students, the way you teach music is a different way because there's less emphasis on them actually knowing like the musical substance. It is,
Yeah.
you just have to get them to do the musical act for this other goal. So I think a lot of times that looks pretty different than like I'm a band director. The way I teach music, because I want them to know about music, that is different than your goal, which is I'm using music to teach them about something else.
Right, exactly. And I always say to like when I talk to students that now talk to me, I say like my number one goal above everything else is to make sure that we are facilitating like positive interactions through music. Like that's my number one goal, is like I just want like the individual in my session or the individuals in my class to come in and have like a positive experience. Like they had fun playing that instrument, like they learned something that day in the song we sang, they felt a boost of confidence, they shared something with their peers. Like it's a positive interaction through music. And I think when you get into like, what does positive mean, right? Like as educators, we have these objectives, or like I have treatment plans, like progress that I'm documenting for the goals. Like we get into like, what's positive? And a lot of times like these students come in and they view positive as like, well, they successfully did it, right? Like they identified the notes or they made the match of the colors, or it's like, yeah, that's a positive thing. But the positive thing is like the positive interaction through music. Like they're in a space where they could be their true selves, or they could work on a skill that maybe they can transfer later. But even that is secondary. Like that's the purpose, but even that to me is secondary. Like the main thing is just like the positive interaction through music. And I think that is like kind of what you were saying. It's like the through music. It's not like for music or to do music. It's like through the music.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that distinguishes it pretty clearly from almost every other music profession. Right? Like if you're doing music production, it's about making music. If you're doing composition, it's about making music. If you're doing music education, it's about teaching music. If you're doing music performance, it's about playing music. Um,
Yeah.
this is about music, but not really. It's using music as opposed to being about the music. Um, so I
Mm-hmm.
think this is sort of related. What are some common misconceptions about music therapy?
Yeah. I think that is, oh, I think there's a lot, first of all, but I want to really quick before we moved on, talk about how, like, I think I gave some examples, but I think kind of through the use of music, I think it is important to give some other examples, like just as an advocate of the profession. Like, like I mentioned, people, like I work in private practice, so a lot of individuals. I work in some school-based settings, but it's really still individuals. So, like there's schools that it's more group setting. So you're working on like social skills or maybe supporting the IEP, right? Some music therapists are primary IEP teams, and um, which I think is great, right? Like I think that's a wonderful option. Like if you have a kid on an IEP and you have like the music therapist in the room, like they're really looking like, they're kind of in a way able to catch all of the other skills that are happening in all of the other like IEP domain areas. And so I think that's really like a really awesome advocate for the child, like especially when they're coming in with just the idea of like, well, this is motivating to them, right? Like when they're in music, like they're having a good time, like they're able to play this instrument. And like, I think sometimes we get lost in like the progress of the IEPs or the whatever. I think so. I think it's really awesome that schools like have that option. Some music therapists work in hospitals. Like NICU units have a lot of music therapists usually. Like there's a lot of like really solid research about like music specifically being able to help like regulate breathing patterns in premature infants, helping them learn feeding habits, right? And that stuff is really important because like little bitty babies in the NICU, right? Like they can't go home until they can eat consistently or they can swallow consistently. And there's a lot of research of like music, like being used as just a basic reinforcement, like teaching the child like some of those like sucking motions that like most babies are born with, but not every baby is. And if you can like build this reinforcement of like if they're sucking, the music is playing, right? If they're not, it stops. Like that's a way that like there's a lot of research that shows that that is helping those skills be developed faster, which means the babies are in the hospital less, which means they can go home sooner, which means they'll have less cognitive and physical delays in the long span of their life. Um, just a lot of really fascinating things like that. And then music therapy also has a big support in kind of, I would say like the grief movement or like the bereavement is what we would say in the field of like, there's a lot of music therapists that do really, really great in hospice and are not only supporting the client, but they're really supporting the family, right? So that's another example of the like through the music, right? Like they're supporting these connections, like helping these families through these really difficult decisions, um, making CDs of the patient's like favorite songs and sharing those with the family, like facilitating like sing-alongs or just like providing music for the family, like in a way that like because we are the trained professionals, like it's so different than just like, oh, we're going to pull up like so and so's favorite song on Spotify. There's like can be a person in the room that can like facilitate that live. A lot of music therapists that work with like child bereavement or like in the NICU will make like lullabies for families, like based on like the heart rate monitors. So there's like some really like that I think is the more like, I don't know, like research based side of music therapy. Like I use that as well. But I think like some of that stuff is really important. And that's the stuff that like when you're looking at music therapy on Google that you're seeing. So I think that that's like important to note because there's that side of it, but it's also important to note there's like all of this other stuff too. Like it's a very wide variety. So I think going into the misconceptions of the field, I think like the biggest misconception is still just like one, like what music therapy is, and like how you can teach it to your students, right? Which is why like I think it's great that you like asked me to be an interview and because I think the number one way to kind of combat that misconception is like people just need to like know about it, right? They need to talk about it. And at this point in the field, the way that you do that is like do things like this, right? Like you have people from your community like me come in and talk about it. And so your students know that it's an option, or that they know what therapy is, and they can go into it and use their skills that they've been developing as a musician to be a music therapist.
No, I think that's great. I think, that's something that wasn't even on my radar when I was going through school. Even in college, like my college was trying to establish a music therapy program while I was there. And I had no idea what it was. Like I had classes every day with people studying that. No idea. At
Right.
least not like an accurate perception. So kind of moving into that, what does the field of music therapy look like today? Are there basic organizations? How is it structured?
Yeah. So it's structured kind of like I would say like national on down. So like a lot of professions, we have like a national association, right? And then we also have like regional associations and state associations. Um, to be honest, the field of music therapy is like it is growing, and people have a lot of disagreements about how to manage that growth. So there's a lot of conversations happening within the field about like what does this profession look like? Like are the things that the associations are doing, like are they representative of the people that are practicing in the field? Are they representative of the clients that we get the opportunity to serve? Um, and I think right now, more than even when I entered the profession like a few years ago, like right now we are really at uh, like just a point where it's like it's going to go one way or the other, right? And so there's a lot of opinions about the association. A lot of that is because we work with so many individuals, so a lot of stuff that has happened, like really in our world, like the COVID pandemic, like the George Floyd murder and uprisings, like social justice, like acceptance of non-binary and genderqueer people. Like there's a lot of those things that are taking like a front seat in music therapy, because like we are serving a variety of people, right? Like I said earlier, music is for anyone, and so like our clients are coming from a lot of walks of life, and a lot of people in the profession, right, as myself included, like feel an obligation, right? Like our profession should be representative of the people that we serve, and it should be representative of the people that work in it. And there's just a lot going on in terms of conversations like that right now. But in terms of the actual, which I kind of think is interesting, it can be a little messy, but it's interesting that to be a part of a profession that's so actively growing. There are about 10,000 music therapists right now in the US. And where I live in Minnesota, there's about 400.
So those are the organizations. What are some of the hot topics that are getting debated right now in music therapy? So you kind of mentioned that there are a lot of discussions. There's kind of a fork in the road coming. What are some of those controversial issues that are in the profession?
Yeah, it's like I just mentioned, kind of just the idea right now of we have these associations, but there's some conversation about like how those organizations should be serving the music therapy community. The main issue coming from that, in addition to the other stuff I mentioned, is those are kind of opinions, but then like what that looks like from the association standpoint is like music therapy is not covered by insurance in every state, which means it is not a licensed profession. So where I live in Minnesota, it is not a licensed profession, which means that it's not eligible to be covered for insurance. And the way that you do that is you become licensed through the state. So like I'm a part of a task force here in Minnesota with a bunch of music therapists that work here, and we are advocating and lobbying and working with representatives with the goal of getting a bill on the floor of the House and the Senate, all that stuff, so that we can be covered by insurance. And the reason that that is such a push is because like that's the number one way to increase access. So that goes back to this idea of like our responsibility is to the clients and the people that we serve. And so right now, because we're not covered by insurance, there are thousands of individuals that are not eligible for music therapy services because they're for them to pay for it. So that's a huge deal. That's something that we're looking to these associations to help us. Some states do. I would say we're in this active thing right now of like some states are covered, some are in the process, some are working towards it with the goal that like hopefully rather than later, like everyone will be covered by insurance. It's not covered by insurance right now in the state of Minnesota where I live, but that doesn't mean it's like people are not paying out of pocket. There's a lot of like supports and like counties and grants and waivers that families can use to pay for services, especially like individuals or families of individuals with disabilities. So that's getting into the weeds a little bit, but that, it's important to mention. Like there is still ways that it's being provided despite the lack of insurance. That's definitely the hot topic right now is being covered by insurance, being licensed in every state. Because you're
Right.
licensed, right? Like
Yeah. So teachers are licensed, and like just looking at that stuff, those the systems are complicated, right? So everyone, not everyone, but most people have insurance. For a long time it was like mandated. Um, that is much easier to navigate, though often not that easy, than like trying to get grants and trying to navigate all these service programs. Um, so just getting insured lowers the bar to entry significantly. Even for those same individuals.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. And it's really all about access, right? Kind of what I said, like music therapy prides itself on being like a client-based profession. And so there's this big argument of like, how can we truly be client-based if we're not even in a position to like provide services to people? And then that also bleeds into other things of like kind of other hot topics of, like there's an entry cost to be a music therapist, like every profession, like you had to get a degree and get licensed. And I had to do the same thing, right? Music therapists are required to have a college degree from a university program that specializes in music therapy. When I was in college, there was only 64 colleges in the US that offered music therapy programs, which is another reason that people haven't heard of it, right? Like you mentioned, like going to school at a program, like not every place has that. And so why would you know what it is, right? When I applied for college, like 63 people applied for the program and they let 9 because it's in this weird spot of like there can't be too many music therapists because it's not licensed everywhere, because it's still growing. Like you can't just be pumping out all these graduates every year if there's no jobs, right? If there's not nursing homes or hospitals that are providing jobs, but a lot of them don't have music therapy jobs because it's not covered by insurance, so they can't fund it, right? So you see how it kind of turns into this big cycle. Um, yeah, so that's kind of another topic I would say is like the cost of entry. So you have to be, and I guess it's maybe like a misconception too, but you have to be or have to have completed a degree, right, in music therapy. You have to complete a 6-month or 1,000-hour unpaid internship. And the reason it's unpaid is because it's technically like a college credit. So you can't get paid if it's a college credit, but you do it after you complete the coursework. So there's like this interesting thing happening there. And then you have to complete your board certification exam. So I'm certified. I'm a board certified music therapist that I have to like maintain my continuing ed through and like pay my dues and do all that type of stuff. So it's a regulated profession. And I think that's another misconception because, again, the people are like, music is my therapy, right? Like they don't recognize that, with my expertise and with my training, like every session, like I'm doing assessments, like I have treatment plans, like my clients have goals that they are clinically working towards. And that is different than like the music volunteer that's playing music in the lobby at the hospital or the person that's going to grandma's nursing home and doing Christmas sing-alongs. And the reason that that's important is not because that volunteer work isn't important, but what happens is people are like, well, I don't need to hire a music therapist because like I have Stacy who comes in and like plays Christmas carols for my residents and like she's a big hit. And like that's wonderful and that stuff should not go away. However, Stacy doesn't have the clinical expertise that I do, right? Like Stacy is not making like doing assessments and making goals and contributing to the treatment plan, like talking with other members of the primary care team. Um, so I think that's kind of a misconception as well. It's just like what is it, right? I would say is a misconception or what makes you a music therapist. Like, so kind of just that misrepresentation and advocacy in that sense.
Yeah, uh, definitely. Something I kind of want to zoom in on because it's, a conversation we've had at length, more than once, is that 6-month clinical internship at the end. And we've compared that to student teaching frequently. Um, but when you look at student teaching, it fits in a college semester. So that's 15 weeks. So that's really closer to 4 months.
Yeah.
Um, and it just looks a lot different, and it happens that last semester of college. So it's not like I guess I shouldn't speak universally. Sometimes it is a 5th year for music education, but for like most educators in general, and I think most music educators, a lot of times it's that like spring of senior year, sometimes fall of senior year thing, but it's done in a semester. And from talking to you, it seems like many of your interns, it says 6 months, but a lot of times it is longer than that or structured in a way that, doesn't happen right after school ends. So it ends up being a longer process.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I have a lot to say about that, but I think kind of the main thing is like to kind of zoom out and go back to kind of what I was mentioning about the associations and just like the profession's overall goal to be covered by insurance. Like the American Music Therapy Association, like their definition of music therapy is like music therapy is the use of like evidence-based music practices in a clinic. Like it's very like, I can't remember exactly, I maybe should have looked it up, but the thing that's important is it's the evidence-based idea, like it's evidence-based. And what they're trying to do as an association is like, because the profession is so growing and because it is like relatively new, there's only about 10 people, which is a lot, but really not many at the same time, right? Like the field of music therapy and subsequently everyone that's in the field is in a place right now to like basically legitimize the profession, right? So the way that we're doing that is we're aligning ourselves with these like clinically like, no, like we do clinicals, right? Like we do practicums, like similar to the way nurses do, similar to the way teachers do. Like we have treatment plans, like we do assessments, like we're the part of a.
So we've talked about some of this, I think, through the conversation. But why do you think music therapy is so underrepresented? At least to me, in my experience, like going through high school, going through college, to passionate music students that want a career in music, but don't want to be band directors, don't want to be performers. Because I think of all the careers in music, like music therapy is probably the one that I heard about the least. You know, I heard about composing and being a performer and being a teacher.
Right.
Therapy is the one that frequently gets left off the list.
Yeah, I think kind of what I've been saying the whole time, I really just think that it's just a lack of knowledge, right? Lack of knowledge and lack of awareness of the profession, which I don't necessarily think is anyone's fault, right? The profession is still up and coming. Like I've kind of outlined, like it's a really great profession that's doing a lot of great work, but there's also like, you know, a lot of things that are just like being figured out. Like, what does it mean to be a music therapist? Like, what does that look like on a national level? You know, like right now, music therapy looks so different, like even state to state from the legal level, right? Like being recognized as a profession. So when you like just start to add in all of that stuff, like it's only offered at like 60 to 70 colleges, like, which is because of like, you know, it all is just, it's just in a place right now. And so that it is growing, it is up and coming, but I still think it's in a place where if you don't know a music therapist or you haven't experienced music therapy, like why would you know about it? You know what I mean? Like I think it's kind of just like the number one reason that it's still not known is because it's like, what is that? Like, who does that? Like, what does that even look like? Right? There's so many of those basic questions that no one has about music education, right? No one's like, what do you do as a band director? Like people know, even if they don't, right? Like they know or have a clear vision of what that profession looks like.
Right. Well, and I think there's a reality where just like people have very limited personal experience with it. You
Mhm.
know, everybody has seen the marching band. Everybody has seen a music performer. You know, most people have like taken a music class going through public school.
Yeah.
Most people have not necessarily experienced music therapy, especially not like in a very like purposeful with a music therapist, you know, goal at the end kind of process. So I think it is just something that people don't experience as regularly.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. And I think the idea of it's just not visible in people's day to day lives, like you said, is very accurate.
Yep.
Yeah.
So for a young person that's thinking about going into music therapy, what should they know about the profession beforehand?
Oh, that's a good question. I think, oh gosh, well, first they need to be exposed to music therapy, right? So, kind of what I've been saying. And I think the number one way that people can be exposed to music therapy is just like really through word of mouth. And I think, you know, I mean, the point of this whole podcast is like really encouraging music educators, right? Or people in that to be aware of like these options, you know, like so that they can present these opportunities to their students. Like I've spent a lot of time talking about, you know, like I feel like such an obligation to my clients, like to serve them and to help them make progress towards their goals. And I really see that the same way, like in music education. Like I think music educators like have a responsibility to know like what the options are for their students so that they can continue to help them foster that, right? Like I think music educators do great work like in the band room or in the orchestra or choir room and like, you know, putting on the concerts and doing the pit orchestras and doing the marching bands. But I do think there is like a small sense of responsibility to like, you know, at the very least, like let your kids know the options of like what comes next, right? Because like their parents aren't doing that. Like their connection to music is the music educators. And so I think like doing things like this, bringing people in from your community to talk to your class, like I have facilitated a few roundtables like here in Minneapolis about like what are your options after you graduate? Like do you have to do band? Like, do you have to do marching band in college? Do you have to be a music educator? Like, what else can you do? And I think like, having a day like that in your curriculum, like even though it takes away from like your concert prep or whatever, like I think that that's really valuable because there are students that like could hear about music therapy and that could put them on a path for their entire life, and I think that that's really valuable, even though it might take away from some of that rehearsal time or, which is also important, right? But like, I think that idea of like finding both and just like being the person that opens up that opportunity for them.
Right. Well, I mean, for teachers, we talk all the time about like lifelong music making. What are the things we would do to get people to play after high school, to get people to play after college? Certainly doing a career in music is one option. Music therapy falls into that. But also just them participating in music therapy or advocating for music therapy after they're out of school is also just lifelong participation in music. Maybe it's signing their own kids up one day. Maybe it's them participating themselves. But um, we talk about that all the time, and if we can't give up a day for that every now and then we don't really mean it. So yeah,
Right.
I think that's a good point. All
Yeah.
right, final. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I have one more thing. I think the other thing for students to know too is to just like, I think one of the things that makes music therapy so great is like it can be whatever you want it to be, right? Like there are so many places that you can be a music therapist, right? So many settings. There are so many different types of people that you can work with as a music therapist. There are so many different ways that you can incorporate music or use music to facilitate these interactions. Um, and I just think that that's important for students to know. Like, it's like, you don't have to be a band director or you don't have to be in like the church choir. And not that there's like, those are great. Like, that's not what I'm saying at all. But I think sometimes there's this idea of like, well, I don't want to be a band director, so I can't continue on with this. Or I don't want to be a teacher, so I can't continue with this. And the thing that I think is so great about music therapy is like, like I don't know any music therapist that their job looks the same. Like some of my best friends are music therapists and our jobs are totally different. Like every day we wake up and do different things for work, but we are board certified music therapists. And so I think that's also really important. And I also think that the other thing I would say, or kind of the last thing to finish that up, is like it can be whatever you want it to be, but it also can, like, you can use like your own music in the way that makes the most sense to you, right? Like my primary instrument is percussion, but I'm not doing like drum lessons every day in music therapy. Like I've learned how to play the guitar. Like I've gotten much more confident using my singing voice. Like there's music therapists that were French horn players and now they, play the piano every day with their clients, and they're not the best piano players because that's not the point, right? The point is like they're using that music that they have learned from their lifelong journey of music up to this point to like continue connecting with others, continue to provide opportunities. Um, and I think that's like important for students to hear, right? Because we like music, it's social, right? Like we listen to music, we share songs, we create music together. And I think just knowing that not only is there this profession, but there's also this opportunity to like do it in the way that like is motivating to you, that like makes sense to you, that is exciting to you. Like there's a lot of freedom in that. And you can make a living doing it.
Right. Well, and I can think about all kinds of students I have that enjoy the music, enjoy playing, but what they really love is the community. They like just being in an ensemble. They like just being in a choir. And so they're so attracted to that they want to go into careers in music because of that connection. Um, but that's not really the focus of a lot of careers in music. Whereas I think music therapy, there are these clear goals. There's these things that you want to accomplish, but a lot of times it boils down to connecting with your clients or having a connection with someone, um, as opposed to like this purely musical outcome that a lot of times becomes the focus. And certainly performing ensembles, whether it's professional or in an educational setting, and then obviously performers are it's about what you do with your instrument. And I think music therapy is a little different in a way that is actually probably pretty relatable to most band students that just love being part of the group, love the experience, and it's not so much about playing their instrument or doing the music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, final question. If someone is interested in becoming a music therapist or even just learning more about the profession, what resources are out there and where should they be looking?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, like I said, you can look up like some associations, right? So there's the American Music Therapy Association. Regional associations are a big source of knowledge, and I think probably a little more representative of the actual field. Ohio and Minnesota are both in the Great Lakes region of music therapy. which is kind of that, like, it's kind of like Minnesota over to Ohio, all those states. So you can get in touch with those associations and kind of see like the facts and the information, the demographics that they have on their websites. I think like though, like more than that, and the most important thing a student can do is just like find a music therapist to talk to. Like you can literally Google like music therapist in my community or music therapy private practices near me. And I think, you know, like send an email. As you've heard me talk about in this podcast, like advocacy and kind of just recognition of the profession is a big part of what we do every day. And any music therapist that gets an email from a student, like it's happened to me several times, like I'm going to stop everything I'm doing and like respond to that. I'm going to invite them to my office. I'm going to ask them if they want to meet for coffee. I'm going to invite them to observe a session. Like we are so excited for people to know what the profession is. And I think, you know, if people can just get in touch with the music therapist like in their community and have more conversations like this, that is the most important thing that a student can do and what I would recommend for someone who's interested in that.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ellie, for talking with me, telling us about music therapy and the different options that are available for our students that are interested in a career in music.
Thank you.